So tonight, part two, I guess, of going through Galatians and addressing the elephants in the room, as Rabbi used to refer to such things. Galatians, just as a recap, is a favorite of folks, even in the church, not so much and out of the church, but especially in the church. It's one of the books they like to use to prove why Christians do not have to be Torah observant, why we are not under the law, why we do not have to observe, anything. It's just grace, 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 and we have our get out of hell free card, and that's about it. But obviously, you're here, you know better than that. So it's not so much tonight intending, and last week and potentially next week, it's not so much here to convince you of the argument of why we are to keep it, because again, you already are. But it's valuable so that when we are confronted or encounter folks of that mindset that like to point to Galatians and say, psh, not for us. You'll hopefully be equipped better to know what to say and how to say it and how to share the correct view of what Paul was actually trying to say. Because again, we stated last week, Bible College 101, they teach you that the Bible cannot mean something different today than it meant at the time it was written to the people to whom it was written. And again, this is all Jewish-centric, to say the least. Yeshua was a Jew. He came to the Jews in Israel and Jerusalem and so on, and it wasn't until Paul and others that started to bring it out of there to the Gentiles. And we discussed last week, kind of one of the main core issues was this rift, so to speak, that existed between Jewish believers and these filthy Gentiles coming into the fold. How dare they? How are we going to handle this? It's all through the book of Acts and several of the Pauline epistles, the letters of Paul, where we have these discussions, not so subtle, where Paul is slamming the Jewish folks with this idea of ergo nomos in the Greek, works of the law, that we don't have to. It's not about the works; it's about faith. It's not about the mitzvah, the ordinances, or the halakha, which of course again means the way. Yeshua said, "I am halakha. I am the way, the truth, and the life." Right. So we talked about that, and that to support the idea about this rift, it's all over Jewish writings. It's all over the Gemara. It's all over the Talmud, Zohar, other rabbinical writings. It's just the way it was that the Gentiles presented a problem for the Jews. Again, they were viewed as unclean, unholy. They were pagan worshiping folks. They were uncircumcised, for Pete's sake. How are these people going to come into the temple? How can they come into the synagogue? How can they be amongst us? How can we eat with them, et cetera, et cetera? And with the Jews, righteousness meant something a little bit different to them. It was all about family. It was about lineage, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and how to become a Jew, you either had to be born one, or marry one, or go through this elaborate process of conversion to become a Jew. But I reminded you last week that when the Jews, the Hebrew lineage, came out of Egypt, they didn't come out by themselves. It was a mixed multitude. There was Egyptians and all kinds of other Gentiles that came out to serve the one true God and receive Torah alongside of the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob at the base of Mount Sinai. And God referred to that group as Israel. So, it already lays the groundwork that, in the word, when it speaks of Israel, it's not just those people in that place or at that time. And, of course, we have other scriptures to back that up, that, we're grafted into the vine. We're adopted into the family. We're adopted in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So what was happening was the Jews that believed were looking upon the Gentiles that had just put their faith in Yeshua, the Jewish Messiah, and, okay, that's great, but now you got to get circumcised. You got to do this, you got to do that. We got all these lists of things that you have to do in order to become part of the family. That is the works. Those are the quote-unquote law or instruction, the ordinances that were the bondage. Because remember, they were the Jewish people in Israel was delivered out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt. Mitzrayim, again, meaning prison, a closed space, bondage. So we were delivered out of that bondage. And again, from the Judeo viewpoint, righteousness to them, to get in, you had to be born in, you had to marry in, or you had to convert and follow the rules of conversion to get in. And then to continue on, obedience to the Torah was how you stayed in. So following their rules of entry, that was initial righteousness. And then obedience is what kept you in. Paul, on the other hand, and all of the Gospels explain that that's not how that works. We're saved by grace. It's faith. It's our trust, our emunah in this Messiah named Yeshua, that he came from heaven, born of a virgin. He lived a sinless life. He kept all of Torah. He was born a Jew. He is the proper seed, if you will. And because of his bloodshed, his atonement that was made on the execution stake, that through that sacrifice, that once for all sacrifice, that now our faith and trust in that grace, think about that grace. That the God of the universe would step out of heaven and do what he did to save us. Whether you're Jew or Gentile, that is immense. That is enormous. That is beyond comprehension. But he did it. We know he did it. Spirit bears witness he did it. The Word bears witness he did it. Secular writings prove he did it. It's all over history. We know it happened. When we place our faith and our trust in that atonement, that is our righteousness. Now we've entered. We don't have to follow all the rules to get in. Torah has enough halakha, that again, it means the way. All 613 commands are halakha. That's our instructions, are how we ought to live in order to please God. That's all we need. That's all we've ever needed. It's all we ever will need. The bondage of works to get in is the problem. Once you're in, and the only way to get in, because Torah never saved anybody. Keeping the law, keeping commandments never saved anybody. It hasn't saved anybody. It never will save anybody. It cannot do that. It wasn't. I don't know that it was ever intended. Because again, Deuteronomy 8:10 and Deuteronomy 10:13. 8:10 specifically, when he says that he took us out of Egypt, brought us through the wilderness, and all of these things that happen, all these tests, all these trials were to prove, to test us, to see whether it was in our heart, whether we would keep his commandments, whether we would obey him. If there was any expectation that we could do it, then guess what? We wouldn't have the book of Leviticus. There would be no sacrificial system. Yeshua wouldn't have had to come and die. He wouldn't have done it. If there was expectation that we could. It's about our hearts. It's about our desire of our hearts. So again, the problem Paul had with these Jews that were trying to put these extra requirements on the Gentiles coming to faith in the Jewish Messiah, that is the bondage Paul is talking about. That's what he's talking against. That's what he's saying is bondage. We're not under the law of sin and death. That's man-made stuff. God's law is beautiful. It's perfect. It's life. The Torah is a tree of life to those who grab hold of it, Proverbs tells us. Yeshua is the tree of life, as pictured and described in Exodus when it talks about making the menorah. And we won't get into that tonight. We've gone through that plenty. If you need a refresher, call me or see me after service. But we are not under the law of sin and death. That's the man-made stuff. That's the extra stuff. So tonight, what we're going to look at, and I'm pretty sure we'll hopefully at least get to, we should hopefully get to Galatians tonight, but we do have a little more groundwork we got to lay, okay? Because another big issue besides this rift between Jew and Gentile and whether or not we're under the law. Yes, we are under the law in the sense that God's law, not man's law. Absolutely not. Because again, if God's law wasn't in effect, there could be no sin. What then? Shall we sin that grace may abound? Romans chapter 6, may it never be. We who have died to sin, how can we live in it any longer? So again, sin is a transgression or breaking of the law. If you don't have the law, you can't have sin, because you can't break that which doesn't exist. And if you can't break the law and there is no sin, you don't need a Savior. So it's obvious to us, right, that the law is in effect. The question is, can it save us? No. No clearer way to say that. Only the blood of Yeshua. Only our faith and trust. That's our justification. Now what? Well, if you listen to Christian television, we just sit back on our couch and relax and enjoy the good life because we're blessed, 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 blessed. Just send in the check. Give me that $1,000 seed. God help them. That's so not why we're saved. That's not God's heart to desire to just lavish us with wealth in this life. Yes, it is God who gives the power to create wealth and to get wealth. It's for his purposes. Not so we can drive Ferraris. Not so we can, live in crazy 60,000 square foot mansions on the lake. And, while people living in apartments struggling paycheck to paycheck can scrape together money to get a blessing that some false teacher living in that mansion lies and tells them to buy into this bondage. That's man-made. That's not God. Store up your treasure in heaven. I like things. I like guitars. I like keyboards. I like stuff. I'm human, but I don't like any of that stuff more than what I'm living my life for, and that's to serve the King of Kings, that I can be with him in eternity, see my rewards. Not so I could buy a Ferrari in heaven, but so I can lay them at his feet. How awesome is that going to be that day? But I digress. So we're saved, justified by what Messiah did, not anything the world or the flesh says that we have to do. Justified by his sacrifice. But now we have to spend the rest of our lives going through a process known as sanctification. We become sanctified. We're being made what? Holy. We're being made holy. We're set apart, separate, different than the world. Becoming less like the world and more like our Father in heaven every single day. Even if just a little bit. And we accomplish that by walking in halakha, his way, his commands, his instructions. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. Because again, all those commands to women don't apply to men. So guys, you don't have to worry about it, and vice versa. Look, some of them only apply to the high priest. If you're not a high priest, guess what? That doesn't apply to you. If you don't, not a farmer, then the agriculture instructions don't apply to you. If you don't live in the land of Israel, that doesn't apply to you. But we learn them all, because in that we learn of God and his love for us, and we love him, and we serve him, and we guard his commands, Deuteronomy 10:13. So the idea is, yes, we follow the law. We don't have condemnation. We don't have fear that if we mess something up that we're going to hell. We got the blood of Jesus. We don't trample on it. We don't engage in sinful behavior that we know is sin and premeditate and say, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do because I got grace. No! We crucify him over and over again when we do that. Stop it. We do our best with his help to walk in the statutes, to walk in his instructions. And then, heaven forbid, when we mess up, we can come boldly under the throne of grace. So,